Level up your LA Kings experience with the new Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access. Enjoy great seats to the game along with premier dining inside the Lexus Club with all-you-can-eat food and non-alcoholic beverages. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings item and parking with your purchase. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn rewards on each purchase from the only ticket company that rewards you for buying. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings.
You're listening to an LA Kings podcast. For more episodes of this and every other Kings program, visit lakings.com/podcast.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
All right, joining me right now, Zach Dooley. How are you doing today, Zach?
Busy day for the fellows.
Very
Jesse.
busy
day.
So, purely by coincidence, you and I were already at the office today, despite the fact that it is a national holiday. We're recording this on June 19th. You were here earlier than I was, I think. Well, yeah, I know you were because you were here when I got here.
I was here earlier than you were.
You probably came in at like 8 a.m., I think. I showed up
I was
closer.
at 8:30.
All right. I was here around 9. We were here for an unrelated reason, but while we were here, it was revealed that the LA Kings traded Pierre-Luc Dubois for Darcy Kuemper from the Washington Capitals.
Yes.
This is our immediate reaction to it. And I've already seen a ton of very funny jokes on social media, which is one of the few benefits of social media. I've also seen a lot of immediate takes and reactions and positive and negative. You and I have asked each other what we thought about it. Other people who happen to be here in the office today have popped their heads in and we've talked about it. I'm still in a bit of shock. We're recording this at what time is it? 1:30-ish?
1:56.
1:56. Yeah. Okay. So it's less than 2 hours after it happened. I'm still wrapping my head around it, but I can say this definitively. The way that rosters are constructed today and the impact that things like salary cap and term and, AAV have on roster, I truly believe this. It's not possible to have an informed take today because we don't know what the impact will be. We don't know how the ripples will affect the rest of the pond. You can feel positive about it if you want, if you didn't like the player going out, if you do like the player coming in. But as far as the question of whether or not the team is better today than yesterday, first of all, I don't really like to evaluate trades that way. But even if you wanted to, I just don't think there's an answer today.
Well, today we're evaluating it in a vacuum, right? We're only looking at today's trade, which is a 1-for-1 swap. The Kings add a goaltender who will likely be the G1.
Yeah.
And they subtract Pierre-Luc Dubois, who was on a long-term deal and was going to be, somewhere in the top 9, center or wing. We can only look at it in a vacuum, but there are so many factors to this deal that will impact the moves the Kings make over the next 2 weeks leading into free agency and throughout the entire summer as they ultimately look to construct their roster. I just keep coming back to the phrase Rob Blake used 4 or 5 times in his avail, which is it just wasn't a good fit.
Yeah.
It was not a good fit with Pierre-Luc Dubois here. He's not a bad player. There's a good player in there. We didn't see that player this past season. Doesn't mean that he might not go on to Washington, get back to where he was, but he simply did not have the impact with the Kings that he was brought in to have. Blake took the bulk of the accountability on himself for not putting Dubois or setting up Dubois for success, not putting him in the right positions to make that impact. Did not blame the player once. He said, I needed to do better with Pierre-Luc Dubois. And now he's gone, right? Now, he will not be a part of the Kings moving forward. And it gives the Kings a vastly different outlook heading into the rest of the summer than you and I would have had at 9 a.m. this morning.
Yeah, I had sat down and already sort of sorted out what I thought the cap situation was prior to the trade.
Yeah.
And, I had talked to you about it a number of times, which was to say that, in my opinion, the Kings had roughly $13 million to acquire a goalie, give Quentin Byfield a new contract, replace Arvidsson or Roy, depending on whether or not they departed. Or if you weren't going to replace them, give raises to players that would.
For those listening, I think you look at the cap very differently than everybody else. The Kings have, on paper, over $20 million in cap space. And just maybe the way that you look at it, I know fills in those holes with league minimum deals.
Yeah, because when you make a budget for yourself, like let's say you're making your own personal entertainment budget, and you decide that you're going to allow yourself $200 a month for entertainment purposes.
Yeah.
Well, there's no minimum amount that you have to spend. You could spend $200 on one concert ticket and just decide, you know what, I really want to see that group. They're playing close to me, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
But that's not how a hockey roster works.
Yeah.
You need to fill a certain amount of spots, and those players need minimum level contracts. So that's how I look at the cap. So when you say there's 20 or something, I say, yes, you're correct.
Just so everyone is understanding, the Kings have
right.
approximately $22.5 million in cap space, but that only accounts for 7 forwards, 5 defensemen, and 2 goaltenders.
Right.
That's obviously not a full team.
And the reason I think about it that way is because I know that my impulse is to say, $20 million.
That's a lot of money.
We can go out and get this guy who costs 15. But the reality is you can't, because that's one spot and you need to fill out. And frankly, looking back in retrospect, I think that was one of the larger impacts of, in the past year, like at the trade deadline, they didn't have room to make a move. To start the season, we thought we were going to be playing shorthanded because, cap situation. So, whether or not they choose to retain Roy or Arvidsson or Trevor Lewis or any of the, free agents, either restricted or unrestricted, we had said earlier in the season, you and I, that the first move that needed to happen was Quentin Byfield's contract, because that would set the term for the rest of it. Well, we were wrong.
The scene has changed.
Because this trade was made, and this trade changes the math. Not just the roster, but also the math. And frankly, the math is probably more important, or has the potential to impact the roster in more ways than just one move.
So here's how it's already ripple effecting, right? The Kings acquired a player who makes $3.25 million less than Dubois. So that's an extra $3.25 that they have to spend to upgrade those positions you talked about. They have a player in Quentin Byfield who is potentially ready to move back into the middle. That's not a secret. I think it's been spoken about. The Kings still view Byfield as a center long term. They don't have to go out and acquire a center. They have a center if they want to use him at center. So that's the other element. You shift Byfield potentially from wing to center, and it creates a different hole, right? It's not, you don't have to go find a top 6 center. You might need a complementary winger. The other part of the coin is the Kings were going to get a goalie either way.
Yeah.
I believe the Kings were going to acquire a goalie who made more than the goalies who played here last year. I don't think that was plan A, was to just go back with a similarly priced tandem. So they got that player in Darcy Kuemper today that fills that spot, but doesn't eat into the originally budgeted number to upgrade that spot.
Right.
Which I think is important. And 3.25 in today's day and age, that's a full player, or it's the difference, part of the difference in the Roy negotiations or Arvidsson's negotiations, or a UFA we're not thinking about to fill those spots. That's a lot of money for a team that has a little bit to play with now. It sets the stage completely differently than we were looking at it before.
If they choose to let Matt Roy walk, it's Jordan Spence's raise and another player potentially.
Easily. Because, Spence's raise already was likely budgeted by the Kings. It's not going to be at Roy's level, right? But that's an extra piece, or it's a better piece, right? If you say, okay, the Kings had $3 million to sign a forward, well, maybe now they have 5.
Another issue
that's a lot.
Yeah, another issue that was brought up in the press conference with Rob Blake was that it didn't cost them the first round pick, and I think I was braced and prepared for the acquisition of a goalie to cost the first round pick, because we had heard the name Linus Allmark out there, UC Saros, we'd heard names like
those names probably require that pick, right? At minimum.
Absolutely they do.
Yeah.
And I believe that the Kings, or at least I believed 2 days ago, that the Kings would make moves to build on the past 3 seasons.
A goaltender of lesser value than those players was traded this morning for a first-round pick, right?
Exactly.
Jacob Markstrom for a 25 pick and a roster player.
Yeah. And
I think the cost for Ullmark or Saros was higher.
Yeah. So that is another element of the trade. This is, I said earlier in the year that I didn't think there was any point in speculating about what kind of contract Quentin Byfield was looking for, because we don't know, right? We're not in the room with him and his agent when they're discussing it.
Yeah.
And there are benefits to both strategies.
for both sides.
Yes. So, you could say the player will want a long-term deal because he'll want the security and not have to worry about injury, and you get the money when you can. But there's also, Austin Matthews took a completely different approach to it and took short-term deals. So, and obviously the best case scenario from a Kings cap flexibility standpoint would have been a bridge deal, because in the immediate term it would have helped them out with cap space.
But it could have cost them on the back end, right?
Right.
There's pros and cons.
Yeah. So like I said, there was no point in speculating. You can if you want to, but you can't pretend like what the player would want, because we have immediate recent results of even just on one team. Marner and Matthews took completely different approaches. Regardless, the reason I bring it all up is to say, I am now going to speculate, not much. If Quentin Byfield did not want a bridge deal and did want a long-term deal at a not insignificant amount, that would hamper the Kings' ability to move cap around. And this trade also solves that problem, if it was a problem. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe he will wind up with a bridge deal. But if he wanted 8 years at more than 5, well, now you have to start thinking about pinching in different areas financially. This trade opens up an extra $3 million and change, and suddenly that problem is a lot easier to maneuver. So obviously, like I said, it's too soon, and there are too many ripple effects, and there are too many potential outcomes. And also, like, maybe Quentin Byfield does play center. Yeah. Maybe the Kings go out and get a different second line center.
Yeah. or a third line center. Yeah. And, they're comfortable with Kopitar, Deneau, and player X.
I mean, last year, Kevin Fiala put up, 70
plus points.
And Trevor Moore was the team's leading goal scorer with more than 30 on a second line of Fiala, Moore, and Deneau.
Right.
Maybe you don't want to change. If you're going to focus on offense and get away from the 1-3-1, maybe you don't want to ruin two lines that have been successful offensive units. Maybe you do want to reimagine, move away from a top 9, move to a top 6, bottom 6. Try and make Alex Laferriere more of a bottom 6 player. Turcotte Thomas mentioned again in Blake's press conference today. That's like the 5th time in the offseason that they've been name checked. And he brought up Brandt Clark, which was totally not immediately relevant to what he was talking about. But I mean, so like I said, my mind is still reeling, and I just don't think there's a real concrete position to have this soon after the trade.
We've got to see what the full picture looks like, right? We haven't really talked about Darcy Kuemper.
No.
Who, frankly, is pretty solid, right? Like, if you look at his 23-24 season, the numbers were a bit underwhelming in an injury-plagued year for him, I believe. But the 5 years before that were really good. He was a top 10, top 15 goalie, top half of the league without a doubt, and more like top third by goals saved above average per natural stat trick. That includes 1 year in Washington, a couple years in Colorado, a couple years in Arizona. He was a pretty good goalie. I think the Kings will still be more of a tandem approach from what Rob Blake was talking about. He referenced 3 times. Yeah. It would be Darcy and David Riddick. It wasn't like Darcy, space, and then David Riddick. It was Darcy and David, so it was the 2 of them. So I think the Kings believe Riddick can play some games for them this year, and they will lean on both guys. But Kuemper will probably be judged on last year more than the 5 before that. And he probably deserves to be judged a little bit more on the 5 before that than just last year, because we saw how dangerous that could be when judging Cam Talbot. And Cam Talbot's background was somewhat similar in that the years before, his numbers were really good. His year in Ottawa, not so much, and turned it around with the Kings pretty quickly.
I also caught on to the fact that Rob Blake went out of his way to talk about the fact that he was looking at it as a tandem. It sounded to me very much like this is not a number 1 and a number 2. This is a tandem. Now, ironically, or maybe not ironically, but the cap hit of Kuemper versus Talbot is significantly larger.
Yes.
And yet I felt all last year, I felt like Talbot was the clear number 1. Now, part of that early in the season felt like because of the familiarity and maybe personal loyalty that Todd McClellan had towards Cam Talbot. I'm not sure.
I think it was the performance of Cam Talbot.
Well, that certainly didn't hurt, and the schedule allowed them to do it that way.
He played like a 1.
Yeah, but I mean, even when the playoffs were coming around, it was like, oh, who's going to start the playoffs? Like, it's going to be Cam Talbot.
It's going to be Cam Talbot, yeah.
This season, despite the fact that Darcy Kuemper has a higher cap hit, it's too early. I mean, it's
certainly
not even July yet,
feels
so
like
who
more
knows?
of a competition.
Yeah.
But also, like, we know these two guys are likely going to be the Kings' 2 goalies.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of what is the breakdown and the timeshare between the two of them. That I feel like has to play itself out. It's not predetermined. And that's probably good, right? When you look at a 34-year-old goalie and a guy who hasn't really been a 1, having that competition and more of a mix is probably the right approach until someone separates themselves.
And last season was that weird situation where Phoenix Copley had performed so well the prior season.
Yeah.
So he was brought in, and so you had 3 goalies. And even though the coach, the general manager, and a number of different media personalities all said that they felt that David Riddick was one of the stronger performers in the preseason, he still started the season in Ontario.
Yeah.
I don't imagine that'll be the situation this year. If they do find an insurance policy goalie to play in Ontario, I don't think that it'll be as up in the air as last year was. Now,
feels more
who
like
knows, but
defined roles,
Yeah.
whereas last year there was a lot more to think about.
Yeah.
And this year, I agree with you. I think it'd be a lot more defined.
And even if at the end of the season, the end result is Darcy Kuemper plays 52 games and David Riddick plays 30, I still feel like it'll be... Now, maybe it's just because we're, in the aftermath of the Rob Blake media availability. It happened less than an hour ago.
Yeah.
Maybe we're just living in that era where the word tandem was thrown at us 3 or 4 times. I don't know. But
Yeah.
But, as far as Darcy Kuemper goes, it was 7 years ago that he played here, but it was Rob Blake's first season as general manager. He did have success. I'm certainly not bringing it up to suggest that who he was 7 years ago.
Yeah.
But as far as familiarity goes and goodwill towards the organization, I have to believe that is at least a positive element of this move.
Look, the body of work between then and now has been pretty solid, all things considered. Blake used character and fit a couple times to describe Kuemper, which means, to me, left on good terms, was well-liked and was a good fit when he was here, meaning there was no hesitation in bringing that player back. And I think that is important. At the goaltending position, I mean, you stop the puck or you don't.
Yeah.
And if you don't stop the puck, I don't care what your character or fit is. It's not going to work
Sure.
out.
Yeah.
But throughout his career, he has stopped the puck.
Yeah.
And if you are also a good character fit, a good systematic fit, which is important at the goaltending position with the volatility that you see around the league, those are good things. But at the end of the day, he's got to stop the puck, right? And he's, for the most part, done that since he was here until now.
And this is another one of those areas where the knock-on effects of the trade will have a direct impact on the meat and potatoes of the trade, because they bring in Darcy Kuemper. He's 34.
Yes.
His performance, as every goalie's performance, will have a lot to do with how the team plays in front of him. The extra $3 million in cap space that the Kings acquire, depending on how it's allocated, can help Darcy Kuemper or challenge Darcy Kuemper.
Potentially, right?
Yeah, we heard a lot about the Kings wanting to adopt a more up-tempo style, I guess, in theory, but we also heard directly from Jim Hiller, who listed Jacques Lemaire as one of his mentors, that the Kings want to improve their offense without sacrificing any of their defensive identity.
Yep.
I expect that not sacrificing that defensive identity will play a role in the success of Darcy Kuemper.
Yeah.
Or however successful they are in maintaining that identity will have a lot to do with how Darcy Kuemper performs.
You can score 50 more goals, but if you give up 100 more in the process, did you actually do what you accomplished? No, you got worse. You got 50 goals worse. So the Kings will be making changes. They have areas they've identified to score more goals, but they're not just going to be in a situation where they leave the goalie out to dry, where they abandon their defense, they put their team in tough positions. That ups the goals against total by more than they're scoring, because that's the opposite effect, right? You're not getting better. You're just changing the way you do things. And when you've done one thing well, which was keep the puck out of the net for 82 games, Kings among the best in the league, you're doing something well. You have to build upon it, not get away from it.
I also want to address, I don't know, how do I want to phrase this? The idea of correcting one's own errors.
Yeah.
Because I know that there are people who are of the opinion that had this trade not happened, Pierre-Luc Dubois would have gone on to have a successful, impactful season for the LA Kings. I would argue that this trade suggests that at least one person did not believe that. That one person being Rob Blake. And Rob Blake took ownership, like you said, as far as why it didn't work out.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, this is an immediate correction of a major move that, you know, I for whatever it's worth, I think it must have been difficult to do that.
I mean, the Kings went out and got a player coming off of like a 30-60 year, right? And Dubois, he was young. They believed he could not only replicate, but elevate. And it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
He said wasn't a great fit a bunch of times, took the onus on himself and the organization for not making it as good of a fit as it could have been, but it might just not have been the right fit. And it's hard to evaluate that in a deal. You're right. Like, he could have come back and been that player. We don't know, and we will never know. He could go on to Washington and be that player. There's a good player in there. You see the size, skates pretty well, can make plays with the puck, gets the puck into the slot. He has the tools. It just didn't work this year. There wasn't the impact on games that he was brought in to have. Blake today took that responsibility on himself, took responsibility for the trade on himself, and made a move today that brought the team in a different direction. Is it going to be a better or worse direction? We'll find out. I think the Kings freed up cap space both now and for the next 7 years. That's one thing. They also filled the goaltender position today. That's a second thing. And now they have a cleaner outlook, short and long term, heading into the draft and free agency. And I don't think they're done.
No, they can't be because they still don't have a full roster.
So this is a big move, but it's not going to be the only big move we see, right?
And frankly, we've already spoken, you and I, to some of our coworkers about this, and I know that I probably come down on a different side of it than you guys do, but I am frankly personally relieved to not have to have this conversation anymore. Like, that to me is, I understand that's not how you build a team. This is just my own personal thing. But like, I am perfectly happy to never have to open Twitter or get texts or DMs or will they, won't they, what's going on? Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Where do you play him? Do you have to make concessions to improve? Like, I don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah.
I'm happy to just not have that in my life anymore.
You know what? For me, like, I think he's a good guy.
Yeah.
I hope that he goes on to Washington and has a good year. I really do.
Yeah.
I hope that he turns into the player that he was acquired here to be. Always available to media in the room. Answered questions, didn't shy away, didn't hide in the back. He was at his stall to be interviewed from our perspective. Admitted it didn't go according to plan.
Could not have been easy for him.
Couldn't have been. It wasn't, right? You saw how hard even that exit interview was. Kopitar talked about it. Deneau talked about it. It was not easy on him. So I hope he gets a fresh start. I hope he performs well in Washington. But I think the Kings have a new way forward. It's a cleaner way forward in the short and the long term. And you have to make moves like this if you feel it benefits you. And Blake clearly felt that it did. And you wish PLD nothing but the best.
Yeah. Having said all that, I do think that this was a move. I was not expecting this or anything like it.
No.
But I do think now that it's done, I think it was necessary. And I'm very excited to see, like I said, the multiple ways that this trade will impact the roster.
I agree.
In all sorts of ripples, wrinkles, and ways.
Totally.
That's all we're going to have for it today. We will have more about it as those ripples start reaching the shore of the pond, to torture the metaphor even further. We will still have an episode tomorrow morning. We're recording this Wednesday afternoon. There will be a Thursday morning episode that we've already recorded.
Exciting episode tomorrow.
Yes, that will be.
Should be cool.
But for now, that's that on this trade. And thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
We are joined today by Vice President General Manager Rob Blake for our media availability. We'll begin with Dan Greenspan. Dan, go ahead.
Rob, what do you think you and the organization got so wrong about Dubois that necessitates trading him after 1 year?
Well, I don't think I did a good enough job integrating him in the right roles on the team here this year. I think it wasn't a great fit in that aspect for us, and we'll take responsibility for that.
Next up, Andrew Knoll. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, so just to kind of piggyback off that, you guys had a lot of conviction last summer. You, Rob, who spoke publicly, and throughout the season said, you would do it again. I guess at what point did you kind of start to reverse course and think about getting out from under this and obviously simultaneously solving another lead, getting a goalie here?
Well, I think the goaltender in return, obviously with Darcy, familiarity with them, our goalie department, understanding them and having a relationship with them. I think the duel with him and David can help stabilize that position here for a few years, which continues our growth with Portillo in the American League. We saw some good things out of him this year, but we also project 2-3 years down the road. And so I think that helps solve an issue here for us.
Thanks for that. But I do want to come back to the first part of the question as well. A lot of conviction. I mean, this was not, we're excited to get this guy. These were big superlatives. Yep. At what point did that kind of turn the other direction? At what point did you kind of think about moving on from PL?
Well, the last few weeks here, since the season's over, like I said, it wasn't a great fit for us team-wise. And, I think the attention probably from the combine in Buffalo where teams start to talk and you start to have dialogue kind of took place from there.
Next up, Eric Stevens. Go ahead, Eric.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for coming on. What is it about Darcy and his countenance that give you confidence that he's a solution for you in goal, in terms of making the playoffs and in terms of even advancing? I know you had him in your first season. What is it about your knowledge of him and his countenance that give you confidence?
Well, I think familiarity with the character, but I think the tandem with David, David played well for us last year. We've had to go to different goalies here the last couple of years throughout the season for different circumstances, but we have comfort in those two getting us to where we want to get to.
How much do you feel Darcy has left in his tank?
Well, hopefully he can come in and do that for us, and that's what we're expecting him to do. And like I said, there was some checks there with his character and understanding the way he plays, but the tandem together is what we're looking at.
And one more quick one from me. With this move, you picked up, if it's correct whatsoever, about a little over $3 million in cap space. That flexibility that you have, how will that help you in terms of, say, addressing moves like re-signing some of your own free agents, or addressing the roster, perhaps upgrading in other areas?
Yeah, and that's what we'll look at here for the next couple weeks. Obviously, a different scenario, flexibility-wise, space-wise, and we'll have to address those going forward here.
Next up, Joe Reedy, go ahead.
Rob, when did discussions with Washington start during the combine, or did they start earlier?
Mostly combine time, but that's normal, I think, for most teams when contact starts taking place, and you understand some summer plans as teams are still playing.
And was there any thought of releasing Pierre-Luc to kind of get cap? I know there was. You could have made a move earlier to get a little bit of cap flexibility if you released him.
What do you mean release?
Not trade him, release him after his first year. I thought there was a way to get some cap flexibility that way.
I guess if you clarify what that release, I'm not sure what you're talking about there. Sorry.
if you would have released him a month or two earlier after the conclusion of this season.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that we didn't discuss anything there.
Okay, thanks.
John Hoven, go ahead.
Rob, how important was it in any sort of a deal to shore up your goaltending to be able to hold on to pick number 21, considering you don't have a second and third right now?
Yes, no, important. I think in the position where you try to get a little stability in that position, and like I said, the tandem of the two with Darcy and David going forward. Yes.
Dan Greenspan, go ahead.
Rob, when you made the trade a year ago, you obviously had PL penciled in as one of your long-term centers. What does this do in terms of sort of the future organizational depth at center? And does this change things for Quentin at all in terms of maybe moving him more towards the middle?
Yeah, part of this process here since the season ended, I think, was the ability to see Quentin take these strides this year. For the most part, we would like to get him back to center ice. So you got Kopitar, you got Deneau, and you got Byfield. And I think he took strides this year that allowed us or enabled us to see him taking on those responsibilities of his own line in the middle.
Take two more here. Simone Olivier Larange, go ahead.
Hey, Rob, I know you were asked before, but did you consider buying the East Countries out in the last days?
No.
It was never an option.
No.
Okay, if it wasn't for his no trade clause to kick on July 1st, would you have considered giving him one more year to show what he can do in LA, or was it just the timing to do this move today?
The timing to do the move today.
Couple more. Andrew Knoll, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for addressing what this does with Q. I also wanted to ask you how this impacts a couple other centermen who are up for contracts, Blake Lizotte and Alex Turcotte. In particular with Turcotte, do you guys see him as a winger or center for the upcoming season? And yeah, just kind of what that does to their situations now that you've got a roster spot open, essentially.
Well, yeah, talking with the staff regarding Quentin going to the middle. Alex has played both wing and center for us and both up here. Like I said, I think at the year-end press conference or after, we expect Akil and Alex and Brant Clark to push for spots in this lineup. They're at that stage of their career where those guys will be in our lineup. Positional wise, I can't give you any clear definition there.
I understand. And as far as Darcy, obviously, he's had kind of an up and down period these last couple of years. Obviously, wins the cup in 22 last year. He ends up kind of falling behind the depth chart behind Lindgren. Where do you think his game is at right now in your own assessments, looking at it on film and that sort of thing? And is that kind of how this deal came together, where Washington kind of had a spare piece, you guys had a spare piece, and it was a fit in that sense?
Yeah, once we started talking about specific destinations there, a lot goes into our goalie department headed up by Bill Ranford and Mike Buckley here. And they go over, their review of the goalies. Listen, they're their experts. They understand the goalies. And like I said, when they comfort with the amount of games with David Rittich and different things, that's how that part came together.
Take two more. Helene and Eric Stevens. Go ahead, Helene.
Hi, Rob. You said earlier that you do think the team did a good enough job of integrating Pierre-Luc into the right roles, but how much of this bad fit was on Pierre himself?
I put it on us. Like I said, we got to work better as a group within this organization to make that fit.
Thank you.
Last one, Eric Stevens. Go ahead, Eric.
Rob, probably moot now, but Cam did well for you. Had you decided to move on there, or was there any consideration in bringing him back?
I haven't had those discussions with him yet, but again, he did play very well for us and, gave us a very reliable goaltending there throughout the season.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for those who have joined today's media availability, and thank you, Rob, for your time. This concludes today's media availability.